All right, good evening, everybody. I saw an interesting article. I like to hear different perspectives. I like to hear perspectives I disagree with. And I saw an article in the Forward, which tends to have articles I disagree with, so every now and then they'll bring a different view. And they've even published for me every now and then, to be honest. But the Forward had an article saying something along the lines of how that Trump's popularity among the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, the Hasidim, and the yeshiva world is a sign of assimilation, because they, instead of the traditional shtadlonis that you see, you have something more along the lines where instead of trying to work with de Blasio and Cuomo, and though they're calling them anti-Semitic, and they're latching on to President Trump, and it's thereby assimilating with the Christians, and they're showing more solidarity with the Christian community than with the non-Orthodox Jewish community. This is nothing new. First of all, even back in the 1600s, 1700s, you go back to Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and he said that when it came to the Jewish left of his day, the Sabbateans, he felt that we should have more in common with the Christians, and Christians should have more, and we should appreciate the wonderful things that Christianity has done to the world, bringing Jewish Torah values to the pagan world, essentially, the formerly pagan world. And this should be something we should celebrate. I don't know where these fruit flies came from, rather than mourn. And we should appreciate this. So it's an old thing, and both Rav Yaakov Emden and his rival Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz both were very friendly with Christian clergy in their respective communities. So it's really quite a traditional thing, and it goes back to older days as well. In the Talmud, you would see dialogues between Greek philosophers and the Jewish rabbis, and so forth, and all throughout history. There's nothing strange about this. But the other difference, though, is the truth of the matter is that the difference between Europe and America is that America is essentially founded on Torah values, and particularly values of common sense, which Chazal say, Chochem Odef Minavi, that a sage is stronger and more powerful ideologically than a prophet, that common sense is more powerful than revealed religion, and more compelling and stronger, and is also, in a sense, more divine, because it's by God's gift of the intellect that God graciously gave us, Atachoinin Ladam Das. And along these lines, so we have this idea here of our teaming up with Christians. It's also nothing new in America. There was always, unity between Jews and Christians. any attacks at anti-Semitism and so forth were an aberration and not the norm in American history. And so the truth is that it's not only is it not going against Jewish value, but the truth of the matter is the Christian community, the conservative Christian community, is much more in line with Torah values than the leftists who just happen to have Jewish ancestry. We're not a community of just brought together by blood. A convert of whatever race or that one comes from, or whatever religious background prior to their conversion to Judaism, is just as Jewish as any born Jew, and just as the one who takes a shahada is just as, well, every Muslim takes a shahada, but it's just as Muslim as someone who's born into a Muslim family as the one who was not born into a Muslim family. They all see themselves as part of the Ummah and as brothers and sisters. And so too, we look at Gerei Tzedek, at pious converts, as our brothers and sisters in faith, and part of our Ummah, part of our Am Yisrael. But by the same token, we should recognize that halachically speaking, a heretic, an apostate, while they do not become a Gentile, they lose their Jewish status. And so they're really a third category, which you might want to, people often call Gentiles non-Jews. I would call it's really more as talking about the non-Gentiles, in a certain sense. These people who might be of Semitic origin, if they don't share our faith, if they brazenly and wantonly violate the Sabbath, and they don't even bother to come to synagogue, and they don't have any connection to the community, and they just happen to have been born Jewish, they're not part of the Klal Yisrael. They're not part of our people. Obviously, there are people who are ashamed of Sabbath desecration and so forth, and they try to hide it, and this and that. That's a different story. There are people who they drive to synagogue, but they are still part of the Klal Yisrael. Even if they drive on the Sabbath or the holidays, they're still part of our people. But they're driving to synagogue, they're demonstrating a devotion to God, a religious devotion, and that would actually include the conservative and even to a certain extent the Reform, that their expression of Judaism, while flawed and in the case of Reform certainly heretical, but I would venture to say that because their expression is based in worship of the Almighty, of the Creator, of the first cause, even if their belief in revelation is flawed and skewed, they're still part of our people, but they need to be taught better. In any event, with all that being said, it's not an aberration and it's not an act of assimilation for pious Jews to have the same goals as pious Christians and pious Muslims, to want to see religious freedom be embraced in this country as was promised by our Constitution and as the left is trying to abrogate. And they have been trying to abrogate for a long time. It's nothing new. FDR, certainly a leftist and a racist leftist, like all leftists, like all Democrats. FDR, and I have no qualms about saying that, because they don't have any qualms about saying that for us, and they're lying. We should have no qualms about saying it, and it's true. Joe Biden is a racist, and I have no problem saying Joe Biden is a racist. And Donald Trump is the least racist person, as he himself says, and as is true. And all this nonsense about dog whistles, meaning something you can't hear and only certain people can hear. They say Trump has dog whistles, of racism. Well, Joe Biden has trombones of racism. And he has dog whistles also when he says something along the lines of, "Do I look like a socialist? I beat the socialists." We know what he's talking about. He's an anti-Semite also, and in applied as the term anti-Semite means, meaning not necessarily a Judeophobe, but there's an anti-Semitic dog whistle in that statement by Joe Biden of saying it's first of all, it's insinuating that Jews are communists, are Marxists, are socialists, which we're not. Pious Jews are not, and the leftist Semites, of course, many of them are people like Bernie Sanders and George Soros and their ilk. But by going by their definition of anti-Semitism, how can you not say that that's an anti-Semitic dog whistle to say, "Do I look like a socialist? I beat the socialists." Joe Biden. Meaning he's saying he doesn't, and when he says, "Do I look like a socialist?" it means does he look Jewish, which he kind of used to when he was younger. Anyway, but it's not an act of assimilation. It's an act of embracing the authentic Torah values against the assimilated ones. And that's the irony, that the assimilationists accuse us of assimilating by embracing authentic Torah values and seeking religious freedom, and seeking the truth is, FDR, he didn't want to talk about freedom of religion. He tried to limit it to mere freedom of worship, but they won't even give us that. When he gave the speech of the Four Freedoms, and instead of saying freedom of religion, which he should have said, he said freedom of worship, which is different. But they don't even give us freedom of worship. If the shuls want to shut themselves, that's their business. It's not the government's job, especially when they contradict themselves and they allow all these big protests. I heard they won't even allow minyanim on the street in Queens and in Brooklyn. Forget about in the shuls. They won't allow the outdoor minyanim. Who are they to say that? What's going on here? Hashem shall helfen, shall zeicher sein to be masak and all these things, because the truth is, this is what we get for supporting people like de Blasio and Cuomo, people who fought against the Torah, and now we're paying for that. So, God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Come, I'll see you later.